Good evening and welcome. Tonight we will be reading some articles out of History Magazine. As you can tell by the title and this beautiful picture here, we are going to be talking about Rome. Lots of various aspects of Rome, from one of the most notorious Roman emperors to Vatican City, you can see here, and the mysteries that lie within, and even kind of a lesser known but still very notorious part of Roman history, the Borgias. If you've never heard of them, you're definitely going to want to stay tuned. These articles were chosen by my channel members, and oh boy, they really wanted these articles because they were chosen by Alex, Vladlin, Laura, Miss Knit Whispers, Alessia, OK Commuter, Cappy97, CMB, Veer, DR, Fiona, and Chris. Thank you all so much for picking these 3 articles. And if you would like to become a channel member and request History Magazine articles, you can click the join button, which should be right about there. Or if you're on mobile and it's not visible, it'll be the first link down in the description box here. And it is only 99 cents a month to be a channel member. It's as cheap as I can possibly make it so that it can be affordable for everyone. And you get all kinds of other perks, not just picking articles. You get all of my videos early. You get your name in every video. There's secret posts that I make to my channel members, and yeah, lots of bonuses. It's a fun little community, and I'd love to have you join. Also, just a personal note, it is freezing in here. The heater does not work in this room. And even if it was, it'd probably be too loud and I would have to have it off anyway. So I've got some tea right here, some English breakfast tea to help warm up my insides and slightly burn my tongue. And then I also have this secret I figured out. This is a bottle full of scalding hot water, and it feels so good. Also makes some nice watery, little bit watery sounds. It's all full, so it's hard to make watery sounds. Okay, so if I take a break to reach over and warm my hands because now they're super hot, or take a sip of tea, that's why. It's because I am an icicle. But let's read about Rome. Let's see, we are starting off in chronological order, turns out, with Nero. Monster or misunderstood. And of course, we'll look at all the pictures after we read each article. A heartless tyrant and narcissist who ordered the murder of his own relatives to cling to power. This is the profile most usually associated with Nero, the 5th and last emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. It's not surprising that this image prevails. Classical sources presented Nero as a depraved, oversexed tyrant with an erratic personality who lived and ruled under the thumb of his ambitious mother, Agrippina the Younger. But curiously, while the ancient authors focused on his ruthless egotism, the political propaganda of Nero's time also highlighted the emperor's clemency. Despite the fact that Nero's government, especially in its final years, systematically persecuted Christians and wiped out dissidents, the Roman Empire under Nero also experienced some of its greatest moments of economic and cultural dynamism. An unworthy emperor? When Emperor Claudius died suddenly in the year 54, Nero succeeded him to the throne at only 16 years old, leapfrogging over other members of the Julio-Claudian ruling dynasty. Claudius had adopted Nero after marrying Nero's mother and Claudius's own niece, Agrippina the Younger. By naming Nero his heir, Claudius overlooked his biological son Britannicus, but Nero enjoyed popular favor and the support of the Praetorian Guard. It was Agrippina, Claudius's second wife, who had maneuvered her son into pole position. She had persuaded Claudius to adopt Nero in the year 50, and thus to allow Nero to marry Claudius's daughter Octavia in the year 53. According to accounts of ancient Roman writers, the following year, once Agrippina was confident Nero's succession was assured, she had Claudius poisoned. The ancient authors who depicted Agrippina as a murderess and framed Nero as a cruel tyrant may have had their own agendas. They resented the fact that Nero's bureaucratization of the imperial administration took power out of the hands of the senatorial class to which those authors belonged. His suppression of indirect taxes in the year 58 resulted in greater participation of the common people in trade, which also displeased the aristocracy. Given these grievances, it is likely that ancient authors amplified narratives to discredit him. Among other misdeeds, the sources attribute dozens of homicides to Nero. While he, like many Roman emperors, undoubtedly caused deaths, many of the murders he is accused of seem improbable if the circumstances surrounding them are analyzed. For example, according to Tacitus, the Roman orator, politician, and historian, writing around the year 300, Nero murdered his half-brother Britannicus out of fear that Agrippina would form an alliance with him. Tacitus adds that Nero and his wife Octavia watched impassively as Britannicus died dramatically in the middle of dinner, while the other diners were in uproar. But when this ill-fated dinner happened in the year 55, Agrippina was at the height of her power and had no motive to support a pro-Britannicus change of government. Historian Anthony Barrett of the University of British Columbia argues that, in fact, Britannicus died as a result of an epileptic seizure. Another gruesome episode attributed to Nero was the death of 400 people enslaved by the senator Lucius Pantanius Secundus. When one of them murdered Secundus, all 400 were sentenced to death. Some Romans rioted, demanding that the innocents be spared. Nero quelled the rebellion and ensured that the mass execution took place. But it was the Senate that had passed this law. Nero simply enforced it. And when some senators suggested that freedmen who had formerly been enslaved by Secundus be exiled from Rome as an additional measure of communal punishment, Nero refused. His position irritated the aristocracy, many of whom he had displaced from key positions in the imperial administration, replacing them with formerly enslaved freedmen in whom he placed his trust. Nero offered other examples of level-headed rule. Early in his reign, to avoid abuses of power by the sovereign and the Senate, he eliminated secret trials held intra cubiculum principis, literally inside the prince's chamber, which involved the arbitrary condemnation or acquittal of a prisoner. Such private hearings had been common in the time of Claudius, and their suppression was recommended by Nero's former tutor and mentor, the philosopher Seneca. Popular with the plebs. By the age of 20, Nero had already forged his own political style and instituted judicial and fiscal reforms benefiting the common people, which were known as plebeians. But his political vision was hampered by his mother, Agrippina, who, after getting rid of all her rivals, threatened to remove her son from power. The first time that Agrippina was accused of plotting a coup d'etat against her son, in the year 55, Nero showed clemency. Agrippina had allied herself with Nero's rival, rebellious Plautus, the great-grandson of Emperor Tiberius. Make sure you guys can see. There we go, the great-grandson of Emperor Tiberius. Nero forgave his mother and her accomplice, and he exiled others involved in the plot. However, when Agrippina again took action against her son 3 years later, one of Nero's advisors encouraged him to have her killed while making it look like an accident at sea. According to Tacitus, it was the freedman Anicetus who dreamed up the boat plot, but Senator and historian Cassius Dio wrote that Seneca and Nero came up with the idea together. Either way, Nero gave orders to scupper the ship his mother was sailing on off the coast of Naples. Miraculously, Agrippina survived the shipwreck. Then on March 23rd, the year 59, she was finally assassinated by Nero's henchmen at her villa in Bauli. It's said that a well-known comic actor made a daring allusion and song to the murder. He sang, "Farewell to thee, father. Farewell to thee, mother," while doing a mime of eating and swimming. Claudius had been poisoned while eating dinner, and Agrippina had narrowly escaped being drowned. I'm going to take a break to warm myself up real quick. Tea. Water bottle. Water bottle, water bottle. Water. Okay. Ooh, feels so nice. Okay. Moving on. Despite these lurid events, which overshadowed Nero's reign and detracted him from his general policy of clemency, Nero retained considerable popularity by providing the people with bread and circuses. But the support of the common people began to wane when Poppaea Sabina, a beautiful Pompeian woman, appeared on the scene. In the year 62, when Poppaea became pregnant several months into an adulterous relationship with Nero, the emperor decided to divorce his wife Octavia and marry Poppaea. To justify these actions, Nero accused Octavia of adultery with an enslaved person and exiled her to Campania on the southwest coast. Outraged, the people began to destroy the public images of Poppaea in solidarity with the exiled empress. The revolt forced Nero to bring Octavia back to Rome, but he was now determined to sentence her to death. After facing a second false accusation of adultery, this time with Nero's former accomplice Anicetus, the commander of the Misenum fleet, Octavia was sent to the island of Pandataria. There, some of the emperor's assassins murdered her by slashing her veins and immersing her in boiling water. Ugh. The animosity the Roman people showed toward Poppaea wasn't shared in other parts of the empire. In the Campania region, where Poppaea was born in the city of Pompeii, the imperial couple enjoyed popular support. On the walls of Pompeian houses, destroyed by the eruption of Vesuvius in the year 79, archaeologists uncovered graffiti reading, "Hail Nero, long live Poppaea," and "Hooray for the emperor and empress." Boom, there. In fact, there were more Pompeian graffiti in favor of Nero than for any previous emperor, and the messages remained visible even after Nero had been sentenced to damnatio memoriae, the removal of all his public and private images and inscriptions after his death. Nero's special popularity in Pompeii can be explained not only by Poppaea's Pompeian origin, I'll say that 10 times fast, Poppaea's Pompeian origin, but also by the favors that Nero granted the city. He contributed to Pompeii's recovery after an earthquake devastated it in the year 62, and he visited in person to make offerings at the Temple of Venus. Nero also gained popularity by allowing Pompeians to return to their amphitheater early. Their games had been banned for 10 years as punishment for a brawl that had broken out in the crowd at a gladiatorial contest when locals clashed violently with spectators from neighboring Nuceria. To cement the loyalty of the Pompeians, Nero reopened it after just 5 years. Not unique. The violence of Nero's reign, as depicted by the ancient biographers, intensified in the 60s CE. Ongoing conflict between the Senate and the emperor fueled conspiracies, and Nero ramped up surveillance. Ophonius Tigellinus, prefect of the Praetorian Guard in the year 62, led an effective team of spies who rooted out alleged conspirators. Accused of defaming Nero, the most dangerous rivals of the emperor met untimely deaths. Rebellious Plautus, Faustus Cornelius Sulla, emperors. Gaius Calpurnius Piso, Seneca, and many of their co-conspirators. But Nero's policy of eliminating adversaries does not differ much from the behavior of the rulers who preceded him. Augustus, who was celebrated as a great emperor, was arguably as aggressive as Nero when it came to dealing with political opponents, ordering all the heirs of his rival Mark Antony killed, for example. Whether an emperor was deemed a champion of the people or a bloodthirsty tyrant depended on the relationship he had with the senatorial class of landowners who wrote the history books. While Augustus safeguarded the privileges of the aristocracy, Nero squeezed them. But the reputations of the two emperors were also shaped by their differing attitudes toward the culture, institutions, and deeply rooted customs of Rome. Nero the Innovator. While Augustus maintained a very conservative policy regarding Roman traditions, Nero tried to replace them with new rituals inspired by Hellenistic culture, which he viewed as more civilized. The changes Nero wrought could be considered a cultural revolution. He built gymnasiums, arenas, and imperial schools for teaching the new traditions, where young aristocratic men were trained to compete in gymnastic and musical contests that were incorporated into Roman festivities. The aristocracy generally rejected what they saw as cultural Neroism. They criticized his spectacles and poetry recitals, and they ridiculed Nero as a narcissistic megalomaniac who craved public acclaim with his zither playing and singing, increasingly out of touch with the people he ruled. The end of Nero's reign was marked by his costly attempt to have a canal at Corinth dug by 6,000 prisoners. By the year 66, things were unraveling. Discontent surged among the people, the army, and the senatorial class due to mismanagement of the distribution of wheat and public finances. Nero's long trip to Greece that year compounded the resentment. Against this backdrop, two provincial governors rebelled against him, Gaius Julius Vindex of Gaul and Servius Sulpicius Galba, Nero's soon-to-be successor. In the year 68, Nero reluctantly returned to Rome, by now very detached from reality. On June 8th, with Galba's rebellion gaining strength, the Praetorian Guard finally abandoned Nero. The emperor fled Rome with his trusted freedmen, Phaon and Epaphroditus, and his male lover, Sporus. On June 9th, the Senate sentenced Nero to death as a public enemy of the state. Punishment entailed being beaten to death with rods, so Nero decided to commit suicide. Lacking the resolve to take his own life, he asked, why is this so hard? Epaphroditus to guide his hands by plunging a dagger into his neck. Nero's suicide brought the Julio-Claudian dynasty to an end. Given his reputation, one might anticipate that his death would prove to be good for Rome. But the power vacuum he left ushered in the Year of the Four Emperors, a bloody civil war that took place as four would-be rulers jostled for power from June 68 to December 69. It was, according to Tacitus, a period rich in disasters, frightful in its wars, torn by civil strife, and even in peace, full of horrors. Let's see the bonus page here. We've got, this is a painting. Okay, here you can see. Here is Nero and Poppaea being presented with Octavia's severed head on a plate. Wowie. This is why this guy is like, ooh, ooh, ooh. And this guy's like, I'm not even gonna look up. That is nasty. But look at the slaves over here, just like, yet another day in Rome. This place is crazy. But yeah, Poppaea looks a little alarmed, but Nero's in the shadows. Ooh, that's a choice by this painter. Who painted this? Where does it say? Where does it say? Where does it say? I don't see it. Revenge of Poppaea by Giovanni Muzzioli. Okay. Yeah, How interesting that he's totally shadowed because he planned her murder. Speaking of, this is Nero's death, right? What an artist dies in me. Yeah, that's pretty gruesome. And then this is Pompeii. You can tell because there's Vesuvius in the background. The empty, quiet streets of Pompeii. As even right now, probably right now as I'm filming this, they're still digging and finding stuff in that city. I'm going to grab my tea with my other hand, take a sip. Oh dear. This is Seneca dying in a tub. I mean, if you're going to go out somewhere, that's the place to go. Oh. English breakfast is my favorite tea. I know that's so basic, but it's my favorite tea. This is Octavia on a coin here. And look at this shot. Holy moly, this is the Colosseum, of course, but what an angle that is. That's beautiful. You never see it from this. It's always from like ground level looking up. You never see it looking down, where you can see the bottom levels where they would like raise things up from the stage. Here, of course, is Rome burning. Famous story they didn't really touch on. I think they're going to talk about it in the next article, where famously Nero fiddled, but we know that that is not true because fiddles didn't even exist back then. And he wasn't even in Rome when this happened. I think this is when he was taking his staycation in Greece, which is another reason that people were very mad. But as we're going to find out, I'm pretty sure they mentioned this next article because they blamed the Christians for it. Who is this? This is young Nero, it says. Color lithograph depicting Nero participating in a bacchanal. Hey, he's having a great time. He's going, hey. Let's see, this is Tacitus. Right here, great beard. Great jawline for a beard. Not so much this face because it's so young. This is Agrippina. Oh, that's why there's no beard, because she probably couldn't grow one. Very curly hair, though. This looked like a young boy, to be honest. But because all the paint is stripped off, you can't really tell. It looks genderless. We have a bust of Nero. Not as great a jawline, but he has his mother's curly hair, doesn't he? There's Poppaea wearing not a lot of clothes. The clothes she's wearing are see-through. Which then what is the point? Nero's golden palace. This is. Wow, there's a statue right there. Easy. And of course this great painting of him just looking very apathetic out here. As wasn't this during Vesuvius? Yeah. So this is supposed to be the ash and the darkness from the volcano, and Nero's just like, ho hum. I couldn't care less. Alright, let's read about the next great story of Rome. The tomb of Saint Peter, mystery beneath the Vatican. This is probably the most famous spot in the Vatican, and when I took art history, my art history teacher focused more on the art of architecture than like painting and photography. We even did a little bit of music, but he loved architecture. And we dissected the whole Vatican. So I learned about how this is supposedly the tomb of St. Peter, but let's find out if that is true. Let's see, one more sip of tea. And one more hand warmer. I should just get hand warmers. I live in Idaho now, and I'm not used to actual cold. And it's not even winter yet. It's not even snowing yet. I should probably get some hand warmers. Okay, let me rub this against my hands. Get them warm. Okay. The Vatican. According to church history, the apostles Peter and Paul arrived in Rome at the time of Nero. There they found a small but committed group of Christians established among the Jewish communities of the city. On Saturdays, Peter and Paul would visit the synagogues, and on Sundays they preached in various homes around the city that doubled as churches. But this way of life was interrupted by the infamous Great Fire of Rome in the year 64. I told you that would come up, which Nero accused the Christians of starting. The emperor had many Christians condemned to death for the blaze. They were executed by crucifixion, burning, or being devoured by wild animals in front of an audience. It's likely that Peter and Paul were among those who died in these gory spectacles. According to the noted Roman historian Tacitus, the executions were staged in the circus that had been begun by Caligula on the Via Cornelia. This was outside the city walls to the west, at a place known as the Vatican. A different tradition records that Peter was killed by crucifixion, placed upside down by his own choice, as a symbol that he had not been worthy to die the same way as the Lord. It's the one I know. Whatever the details of Peter's death, the question of what then happened to his body has been a vexed one. One early church source provides a lead. According to the apocryphal text, Acts of Peter and Paul, written by Pseudo-Marcellus around the year 400, some men from Jerusalem who were glorious and strange in appearance joined Marcellus, a follower of Peter, and took up Peter's body secretly and put it underneath the terebinth near the Naumachia, which was the place for the exhibition of sea fights, in the place called the Vatican. This suggests that Peter was buried near where he was murdered, in a pagan necropolis on the Via Cornelia, near the Circus of Caligula. This was the area known as the Vatican Necropolis. I think last time we read about, well, not last time, but when we read about obelisks, the Circus of Caligula had an Egyptian obelisk put in from Egypt. Veneration of the Apostle. Although at first the tomb of Peter was probably a simple one and almost anonymous, the growth of the Christian community in Rome soon made it a focus for the faithful. In an effort to preserve the tomb, it was covered with new stone slabs and a ground level of the site, and as the ground level of the site rose. Then, in the mid-2nd century, a small commemorative monument was built on top. Something similar happened with the tomb of Paul, located, at least according to tradition, to the south of the city, near the Acropolis of the Via Ostiense, I think. The earliest written reference to the funerary monuments of Peter and Paul dates to around the year 200, when Gaius, a presbyter or bishop of the Church of Rome, stated that the trophies of both apostles could be seen in Rome, one in the Vatican and the other on the Via Ostiense. The word trophy was used for tombs erected to Christian martyrs, since martyrdom was equated to a triumph of faith over death. Interest in the tomb of St. Peter grew as it became widely accepted that the Church of Rome held primacy over all the other Christian churches. According to the Petrine theory, developed in the 2nd century, Peter had received from Jesus Christ himself the keys to the kingdom of heaven. So, having establishing himself in Rome as the first bishop of the city, Peter is believed to transmit to his successors the highest possible authority over the Christian community. I just realized while reading that. Is that why the Vatican's flag has keys on it? Makes sense. Although not all the churches accepted this claim, it nonetheless added potency to Peter's tomb. So when the Emperor Constantine I ordered the construction of a great Christian basilica in Rome as part of his policy of promoting Christianity as the dominant religion of the empire, he chose the site of Peter's tomb, knowing that the new temple was built around the tomb of such an important figure in the Christian tradition would surely attract believers. Bishop Eusebius of Caesarea, in his Theophany, wrote that the apostle had been honored with a splendid tomb before the city, a tomb to which innumerable hordes flock from every part of the Roman Empire, as a great shrine and temple of God. A colossal basilica. The decision to erect the basilica over the pre-existing tomb had enormous implications for the construction process. Since the Vatican was an area of uneven hilly terrain, a huge platform nearly 800 feet long and almost 300 feet wide was built on top of the ancient Vatican necropolis on the Via Cornelia to support the basilica. A huge volume of earth had to be removed in order to create the platform that reached a depth of some 30 feet. Despite the ambitious construction work, the surrounding necropolis couldn't be destroyed as the tombs and mausoleums were protected by sacred law. So Constantine I ordered that instead of removing the tombs completely, the roofs should be taken off, their vaults broken, and the interior space filled with earth. The bones would remain buried under the new basilica. The building was constructed so that a monument, later known as the Trophy of Gaius, was built over the original tomb and located under the apse. Its site was marked inside the temple with a square marble structure covered by a ciborium with 4 Solomonic columns. But the trophy itself was buried under the platform of the basilica. The trophy and Peter's tomb beneath it were further buried in the 16th century when the old basilica was demolished and rebuilt to a Renaissance design. The new Renaissance building was erected on the second platform, some 10 feet above the first, and supported by a system of vaults. These vaults created a space between the 4th century basilica and the Renaissance one, the so-called Vatican grottos that were used as burial places for the popes. The bones of St. Peter, believed to be buried beneath, were left in peace at this point. In 1626, the remains of various tombs and burial mounds were disturbed unintentionally during work to put in place the bronze columns of the famous baldachin designed by sculptor and architect Gian Lorenzo Bernini. We were studying Bernini in my class. It was actually more like a humanities art history. Anyway, you know what I mean. Like art history with the humanities, but moving on. But Pope Urban VIII ordered the uncovering of the tombs to be kept quiet, as the remains belonged to pagans who had been buried in the ancient necropolis. The archaeologists arrive. It wasn't until the 20th century that the oldest stratum of St. Peter's Basilica finally came to light. In 1939, Pope Pius XII decided to open the Vatican grottos to the public. To make this practical, it was necessary to increase the height of the interior space by lowering the floor level of the original paving some 2.5 feet. As soon as the workers began digging, they uncovered several Roman tombs belonging to the ancient Vatican necropolis. For the Church, an archaeological investigation of these remains was a highly sensitive undertaking. It involved determining whether the tomb of St. Peter, with his mortal remains inside, really was under the altar of the basilica. This tradition, which had been so important to the identity of the Church of Rome, had been challenged by Protestants in the 16th century. Martin Luther wrote that according to sources in Rome, it is unknown where in the city the bodies of St. Peter and Paul are located, or even whether they are there at all. Even the Pope and the cardinals know very well that they do not know. Despite the controversy, Pius XII commissioned a major archaeological investigation. The excavation, directed by the archaeologist Antonio Ferrua under the supervision of Monsignor Ludwig Koss, lasted for more than a decade and made it possible to identify and restore 22 tombs. Say that 10 times fast. 22 tombs belonging to the Roman necropolis of the Via Cornelia, adjacent to the Circus of Caligula. The tombs, having lain undisturbed and buried in the earth for centuries, had been extremely well preserved, and their stuccos and paintings were found in an excellent state of repair. A construction discovered exactly beneath the vertical axis of the altar in the basilica attracted the most attention. It was a structure with 2 niches, one above the other, attached to a red stuccoed wall. Archaeologists identified it as the Trophy of Gaius, the monument mentioned in the sources as having been built in the 2nd century to mark Peter's tomb. On December 23, 1950, in his Christmas radio address, Pius XII announced the discovery in unequivocal terms. Has the tomb of St. Peter really been found? To that question, the answer is beyond all doubt. Yes, the tomb of the Prince of the Apostles has been found. But was it really? Let me take a quick tea sip while you think about it. Oh, it's the perfect temperature. It's warm, but it's just starting to get cold. What do you think? Is that really the tomb? There's a picture of it here. Is this it? What do you think? Let's find out after I warm up my hands a little more. Wow, there are icicles. Okay. Papal announcements. The scientific reports on the excavation were more cautious, however. They described the discovery of a modest, venerated tomb. I'm going to go like this. Venerated tomb, which had been almost completely destroyed. Although Christian symbols and graffiti were found, they were hard to read and interpret. In any case, they seemed to date to the time of the Constantinian construction. The excavation ordered by Pius XII had set its sights on finding the tomb of St. Peter, and even more important, his bones. Given the importance of the relics within the Catholic Church, being able to identify the mortal remains of Jesus' right-hand man would have been an extraordinary event. While excavating under the 2 niches that form the Trophy of Gaius, the archaeologists came across an underground cavity some 3 feet deep. If there were bones inside, surely there was a chance that they belonged to the apostle. But initially all the archaeologists found was a large number of coins, probably left by pilgrims. During the excavation, some skeletal remains were uncovered, but not inside the tomb. At the time, the bones didn't arouse particular interest, and so were removed and stored in a wooden box in the warehouse of the Vatican grottos. We'll look at that later. In his radio address of December 1950, I'm going to go like this again. Pope Pius X referred to these bones, but stopped short of claiming they belonged to Peter. At the site of the tomb, the remains of human bones have been found. However, it is impossible to prove with certainty that they belong to the body of the apostle. This still leaves intact the historical reality of the tomb itself. The subsequent investigation of those bones was driven by epigrapher Margherita Guarducci. She personally asked permission from the Pope to undertake a study of all the graffiti associated with the Trophy of Gaius. The inscriptions, scribbled in charcoal or engraved with a stylus on the ruins of the monument, were concentrated on a wall that, as a buttress, had been built perpendicular to the red stucco wall of the Trophy of Gaius to shore it up. On this wall, known as Wall G or the Graffiti Wall, Guarducci noticed a small loculus or cavity that had not been investigated. During their work in the grottos, one of the excavation workers told Guarducci that this loculus in Wall G was where the bones mentioned by the Pope had originally been found. Guarducci managed to track down the bones within the warehouse and asked the Pope if she could have them analyzed by a renowned forensic doctor. The results came back in 1963 and indicated that the skeletal remains all belonged to one man. According to the analysis, he had been corpulent and had died at an advanced age, between 60 and 70 years old. The analysis also revealed traces of a wool fabric dyed purple and interwoven with gold. This suggested that the bones had been carefully wrapped before being placed in the loculus. The conclusion seemed obvious, at least to Guarducci. The bones belonged to St. Peter. Based on these results, in 1968, Pope Paul VI solemnly announced that the bones of the apostle had been found. Here is Peter. During the excavations, Ferrua noticed a fragment of the graffiti wall had become detached, and on it he made out some Greek letters. Although the text was incomplete, the archaeologist restored it as Petros Eni, here is Peter. This was the first textual indication that the trophy of Gaius was indeed Peter's tomb. However, not all scholars agreed with Verrua's interpretation. For example, it's possible to understand the opposite meaning from the inscription Petros Ende, Peter's not here. Guarducci later managed to decipher other graffiti on the wall, and after a long study came to the conclusion that they were messages from faithful Christians written in code at the time of the anti-Christian persecutions. She identified and interpreted about 20 symbols as references to St. Peter. Decades later, the identification of the bones and the interpretation of the graffiti are still hotly debated, given that Peter was martyred somewhere in the area where a basilica was later consecrated to him. It seems logical that the trophy of Gaius was built over a modest memorial for the apostle. Over the centuries, this special enclave of the Vatican necropolis has become a space of Christian veneration. What's harder to be sure about is whether the bones discovered here truly belonged to Peter. I guess we can't DNA test them, can we? So here we have the beautiful exterior of the Vatican with these, what my art humanities teacher called these big claws. But he said they're meant to be like they're reaching out and grabbing you and keeping you in, welcoming you in, kind of like that. But yeah, this is where the Pope gives addresses and everyone can watch. But it's very beautiful. Yeah, okay. So this is the niche they were talking about, and as you can see, it's made much more prettier nowadays with a little inscription up here. There's the keys of the Vatican. That's all gussed up now, and that's where they believe St. Peter is. So that's something. This is Guarducci here analyzing. Oh, it's a picture. I guess, let me see. Let's look closer. She's pointing at what the little niche looked like when she saw it. So that's what the bare rock cavity there is now this. So here we have the construction of the Vatican. So here's what the trophy of Gaius would have been. And down there's the vault. That would have been Peter's tomb. And then up here was the more ornate trophy, I guess they called it, into a little chapel they would build on top of that. Oh, I see. So inside of here is the trophy, and that would have been Peter. Okay. And nowadays we have this gorgeous, like, spiraled altar here. And then you have to go below to get to this part. Just been buried on top over and over and over again. We looked at this. This was the little red area. It says that the pagan burial that was here belongs to Aemilia Gorgonia, who was an actress, and her inscription says "Dormit in pace," or "Rest in peace, Amelia." Here is, let's see, Maria Valtorta. Okay, no, that's the lady, Maria Valtorta. Who is this supposed to be? This is Pope Pius. What is this? I probably should have read all those first. Pope Pius XII, above, photographed during World War II. That makes much more sense. I was like, that's not a Maria. So here we have the altar. You can see, this is my favorite part, is these spiral columns that look like they're moving. If you go behind it, you enter, or at least you can see the grottos. It looks like there's a little gate here that's blocked off, and staircases that lead down to the secrets below the Vatican. There's the, I guess, the original trophy area. You can see there. And what's this? What's this? What's this? A little stucco there looks like the Last Supper. What is this? I'm not sure. But wow. Let's see. Recreated St. Peter's Basilica. Oh, so this is what they think it looked like in the 4th century. It's painted in the early 17th century. And then there it is in the background of this painting, receiving the keys to heaven. There's Peter and Paul. Looked at this a bit. This is the Circus of Caligula. And what I like about this is that there's a silhouette of where the Vatican Basilica, at least, is today, overlaid over this. Right there. Uh-oh. He's getting crucified upside down. That must have been... I can't imagine you live very long doing that. Little fishies there. And then we already saw this beautiful image here. Alright, let's read one more story tonight. Also involves a pope, but not in the way you would expect. The Black Legend of the Borgias. I'm gonna go like this again. In the searing heat of Rome, August 1492, a large and lavish ceremony took place to crown a new pope who had bribed his way into office, the Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia of Valencia, Spain, known from then on as Alexander VI. At 60 years old, the new pope was an imposing man with exquisite manners and an affable charm. He had served as dean of the College of Cardinals and vice-chancellor of the church for 5 papacies, surpassing all other prelates in authority, knowledge, experience, and influence. But Rodrigo was a man of the secular world too. He had already fathered a boy and 2 girls by the time he met Vannozza Catanei, his lover for more than 3 decades. With Catanei, he had 4 more children: Cesar, Juan, Lucrezia, and Goffredo, each of whom he openly claimed, and all of them brilliant and controversial in their own right. They were star players in the scandalous events that surrounded the Borgia family. The highly unfavorable Black Legend was created by their enemies, and although much of it was built on nothing more than malicious gossip, it continues to fascinate. A loving father. Rodrigo was a devoted and attentive father, but plans for his children combined affection with pragmatism. Each family member had to play their role in the joint project that was increasing the existing power, influence, and wealth of the House of Borgia. In 1485, Rodrigo bought the Duchy of Gandia in eastern Spain from King Ferdinand II of Aragon, and promised marriage between his firstborn son, Pierluigi, and the king's first cousin, Maria Enriquez de Luna. I'm going to sip some tea real quick. I'm afraid it's going to start getting cold. Yeah, it's like not hot anymore. It's just warm. I'm gonna like chug it after this so I don't waste any. This laid a solid base in Rodrigo's native kingdom of Valencia. He was born in that place. I'm not gonna try. From where he could establish the secular power of the Borgia family. 3 years later, Pierluigi died, and his half-brother Juan became the Duke of Gandia. Juan would also marry Pierluigi's betrothed. By this time, Rodrigo had already lost 1 daughter, and the other had been married to a nobleman from Rome, so he concentrated all his expectations and paternal love on the children he had with Catanei. Cesar, Juan, Lucrezia, and Goffredo had spent their early years with their mother in a house located next to the Borgia Palace, the most beautiful and sumptuous residence in Rome. Notorious for his extreme wealth, Rodrigo had been severely rebuked by Pope Pius II for his indulgence with mistresses. Despite Catanei's successive marriages also complicating the picture, The Borgia-Catanei dynamic was, for many years at least, intense and affectionate. By the time Goffredo, their youngest child, was born, the romance between Rodrigo and Catanei had cooled. Still, their relationship remained amicable. Rodrigo's papal election significantly impacted the whole Borgia family, bringing an increase of power, wealth, and enemies. He was immensely proud of his children, who by then were all in their prime. He loved their youth, their grace and beauty, their lively wits, good manners, and joy. He wanted them nearby so he could enjoy their company and show them off. He installed Lucrezia in the Palazzo Santa Maria in Portico, which was attached to St. Peter's Basilica, and housed his sons either in the Vatican's Apostolic Palace, which is the Pope's residence, or close by. The so-called secret rooms of the Borgia apartment, intended for the pontiff's private use, became the family meeting place. It was here where Lucrezia celebrated her first marriage among hundreds of guests, as well as the party for her second wedding. For one of the occasions, the rooms were lavishly decorated, with a fountain and entertainers dressed as animals emerging from foliage to dance with guests. One afternoon, a ceiling of one room collapsed onto the throne of Alexander VI while he waited for his children. The strength of the canopy that covered the seat saved his life. In another nearby chamber, Alfonso of Aragon, Lucrezia's second husband, was murdered. The home of the Borgias was a place of happiness and misfortune for 11 years. Mixing politics and family. Rodrigo's accession to the papal throne introduced a new element to his plans. The careers and marriages of his children would need to do more than simply satisfy the Borgia family's personal interests. Nepotistic appointments were quite common for the church. Rodrigo was appointed a cardinal when his uncle reigned as Pope Calixtus III. Likewise, Pope Alexander VI bestowed his son Caesar with the same appointment. Any marital match would also shore up the Papal States, the Church's dominions on Italian soil, which were under threat from France and the Catholic monarchs of Spain. Between 1493 and 1494, Pope Alexander VI sealed 3 important alliances. Juan, Duke of Gandia, was married to Maria Enriquez de Luna, a cousin of Ferdinand II. Lucrezia was married to Giovanni Sforza, a relative of the powerful Duke of Milan. And Goffredo was married to Sancha of Aragon, the illegitimate daughter of King Alfonso II of Naples, who was also a relative of Ferdinand II. Despite the Pope's strong opposition, the French king invaded Italy in 1494 with the help of the Duke of Milan. After 3 years, this resulted in the annulment of Lucrezia's marriage to Sforza, and she subsequently married Alfonso of Aragon, Sancho's brother. The union reinforced the Pope's Neapolitan alliance. During this turbulent period, political events led Cardinal Caesar to abandon his ecclesiastical career and, in agreement with his father, marry a sister of the King of Navarre, a relative of the French monarch. This alliance clashed with the interests of the King of Naples and his relatives, the Catholic monarchs, Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon. Tensions arose within the Borgia family as Lucrezia and Caesar found themselves, through their spouses, on opposing sides of the war until Lucrezia's husband was murdered in 1500. How convenient. The strain was ultimately assuaged by Lucrezia's third marriage to the future Duke of Ferrara, a match deemed acceptable by the whole family. I just took a break to chug the rest of my tea. Oh, it was so good. I didn't want it to get cold. I hate when the tea gets cold. Okay. All right, let's continue. Father and children. The children of Alexander VI did not question their father's decisions. He was the source of their power and wealth. They owed him obedience both as a parent and as the supreme pontiff. But Alexander's behavior could be troubling, and it took a toll on his children and their relationships with each other. Although he loved them all, the Pope did not hide his preferences. Goffredo, the youngest, was not the favorite. More than once, Alexander even questioned whether Goffredo, who was timid by nature, was actually his son. Alexander's relative detachment from Goffredo led to heated confrontations between the Pope and Goffredo's wife Sancha. While Goffredo tended to keep his head down and obey his father's commands, she wasn't one to bite her tongue. Juan, on the other hand, was adorned by the Pope. At the request of the Catholic monarchs, Juan was sent to Spain to be invested as Duke of Gandia and to seal the marriage arranged for him with Ferdinand II's cousin. Alexander prepared an even more splendid future for Juan on Italian soil. He showered him with titles, honors, territories, and wealth. And Juan, though he didn't always follow his father's advice, knew how to talk him round. But in 1497, when Juan returned to Rome, disaster struck. He was stabbed to death by unknown assassins and thrown into the Tiber River. Alexander's desolation was absolute. If we had 7 papacies, we would give them all to restore him to life, he declared, weeping before the consistory. As cardinal, Caesar from the beginning offered the Pope firm support in affairs of both church and state. An ambassador, Gianandrea Boccaccio, wrote of Caesar, "He is a man of great talent and of excellent nature. His manners are those of a sonnet and a great prince. Perhaps his father saw in him the potential for a third Borgia pope. In any case, Alexander did not immediately give in to Caesar's repeated requests that he be allowed to abandon his own ecclesiastical career, for which Caesar claimed he felt no vocation. The Pope only accepted Caesar's resignation as cardinal a year after Juan's death. Caesar recognized his father as a great master in the art of politics, and the changing alliances that characterized the time. They had several shared objectives, but Caesar was aware that given his father's age and failing health, time was running out. As commander of the papal army, Caesar conquered cities in an attempt to carve out a Borgia state. Even his allies despised his growing power, and after his father's passing, Caesar struggled to maintain control without papal support. Lucrezia, the most favored. Among all his children, the Pope most favored Lucrezia, the jewel of the family, for her beauty, sweet nature, and refinement. There was a strong bond of affection between father and daughter. Lucrezia's first husband was Giovanni Sforza, a relative of the Duke of Milan. That marriage failed not only on a personal level, but also a political one. The marriage ended in annulment. And for Lucrezia, there was a bitter epilogue. Sforza insinuated that she had engaged in an incestuous relationship with her father. Rumors spread to implicate her brothers, too. Although the claim was refuted time and again, it still lingered. Despite their familial affection, Lucrezia soon discovered that her father had as much capacity to hurt her as he had to love her, and it would be impossible to find peace so long as he could interfere in her life. So after the murder of her second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, she married for a third time to Alfonso d'Este, heir to the duchies of Ferrara, Modena, and Reggio. This allowed her to move far from Rome. Aware of her reasons for leaving and of the union's convenience for the entire family, her father accepted the separation. Of the Pope's regard for his daughter, the Duke of Ferrara secretly remarked, "His Holiness loves her more than any other person of his blood." Sibling rivalries. Wherever the Borgia Catene met, laughter, gallantry, wit, and music abounded. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Some of the natural squabbles among siblings hardened into bitterness. Lucrezia was, in a way, the one who held them together. Goffredo was particularly close to Lucrezia. They went everywhere together, and she was protective of him. They grew even closer when Lucrezia married Alfonso of Aragon, the brother of Goffredo's wife Sancha. Lucrezia and Sancho were great friends, and neither the failure of Sancho and Joffredo's marriage nor the death of Alfonso broke the bond of friendship between the two sisters-in-law. It was Joffredo who protected Lucrezia and Alfonso's 2-year-old son, Rodrigo, during the violent acts unleashed in Rome after the death of the Pope. Little Rodrigo's father, Alfonso of Aragon, was already dead at this point. But the brother for whom Lucrezia had the most affinity was Juan. Between Juan and Caesar, however, the relationship was strained. Alexander had maneuvered for Juan to receive all sorts of titles and territories, believing that this was in the best interest of the wider family. Meanwhile, Caesar, despite outshining his brother intellectually, had been forced to follow an ecclesiastical path that he hated. Perhaps Caesar considered himself more qualified than his brother to become a great prince. That perception was emphasized when Juan returned to Rome and demonstrated mediocre skills on the battlefield. Though Caesar lacked Juan's titles, his influence in the political and ecclesiastical realms went beyond that of the duke's power. In fact, as the Pope's cardinal legate, Caesar was preparing to crown the new king of Naples, Frederick II. It was a level of authority that was difficult to surpass. Malicious rumors circulated that both Caesar and Juan were vying for their sister-in-law, Sancho of Aragon. It was impossible to know whether or not there was any truth to the gossip. Juan did have a reputation for being a womanizer, but the story could also have been an invention of the so-called Black Legend. The latter accusations that Caesar murdered Juan because of sexual jealousy over Sancho are also hard to prove. Such gossip, however, worked to obscure an obvious political motive for the crime. Juan had achieved enormous power on Italian soil, and the death dealt a severe blow to the power of the House of Borgia in Italy and the Kingdom of Valencia. Juan's heir was not yet 3 years old, showing the vulnerability of the pontiff. Lucrezia and Caesar. The relationship between Caesar and Lucrezia lurched between affection to rivalry. At one point, their respective marriages placed them in rival camps. Lucrezia's second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, was the son of the new king of Naples, while Caesar married a sister of the king of France. As the French and Neapolitan monarchs prepared to go to war, the Pope maintained his alliance with Naples. The antagonism between Caesar and Lucrezia's short-lived second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, was palpable. And in the summer of 1500, while convalescing from a serious attack, Alfonso was murdered in his bed by Caesar's hitmen. Caesar alleged that Alfonso had attacked him first by shooting at him with a crossbow bolt from his sick room. The details of what really happened are shrouded in mystery. Shortly after, Alexander VI switched his allegiances to France. For Lucrezia, the murder of her husband was difficult to forgive. And yet, when Caesar was in trouble after the death of Alexander, she helped him with weapons and money. By that time, she was the Duchess of Ferrara and was able to intercede on his behalf, appealing to Ferdinand II, who was holding him captive. Caesar managed to escape and reach the kingdom of Navarra, where he died in Viana fighting at the head of the Navarrese army. This deeply affected Lucrezia because she loved him like a mother. The Borgias tended to form a united front in both their successes and failures. Their behavior, though similar to that of other noble households of the era, was scrutinized intently, and enemies of the family and the papacy seized upon and distorted any unusual detail as they laid the groundwork for the Black Legend of the Borgias. Even as historical evidence contradicts the legend, this soap opera has penetrated deep into popular imagination, and there it has remained. Wasn't there a TV show for the Borgias? I'm pretty sure. Oh, okay, that was the end of that. So here we have, let's see, Portrait of a Gentleman. Oh, this is believed to be Caesar, it says. Possibly a painting of Caesar. On the Borgia City Trail. You can follow their lives. A relic of Lucrezia, it says. This looks like a lock of her hair. How amazing. Yep. Fortress for the Pope. So this is his private residence in the Vatican. Isn't that something? Is it in the Vatican or is it just in like Rome? Does it say? Reinforce the Castel Sant'Angelo. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I guess yes is the answer. So this is, I guess it's Lucrezia. Oh, so it's just a painting of a lady, but it's believed to be used from the likeness of Lucrezia. Very pretty. Here's a map of where everything was happening. So if you're wondering why it's talking about the Papal States, that was all the purple you see here. Here's Milan they talked about. And Naples down here. This is Lucrezia's third husband. Oh my, okay, look at this. Here's a who's who. Not sure. Saint Catherine. Not sure. Oh, okay. This is a painting in the Borgia apartments. I was like, who is supposed to be who? But no, this is a big painting on the ceiling, I guess, or high on the wall in the Borgia's apartment in the Vatican. Let's see. I forgot to read all these boxes before I filmed, so I'm not sure what I'm looking at in each one. This is the gallery of maps in the Vatican. This looks like it was commissioned by Alexander's father when he was Pope. This is believed to be Juan. The shield of Alexander VI here. Oop, there we go. This is the Sforza residence in Milan, all lit up beautifully here. A family tree here, which we kind of went over in detail. I don't think we need to go over it again. We talked about it over and over. This is Charles the VII of France, who's waging all those wars they were talking about. And let's see, a fresco for the Borgia apartment. Big old glowing Jesus there, rising out of the tomb. And then this is, oh, this could have been Catenay in this picture. Okay. And then this last painting here. This is Pope Alexander II, or Rodrigo Borgia. All right, that is it for tonight. My camera's about to die. I took a quick break to plug it in, so now I'm afraid it's going to overheat, because that's usually what happens. But also, this room is ice cold, so will it overheat? I don't think it will, actually. But I'm going to wrap this up, just in case it does. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video to be relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a good